honored and excited to be here, very humbled, and also excited to hear more from you during the discussion. I've been working on this from my own point of view as a Romani scientist slash activist working for a foundation. So having external input from such a diverse group is very enriching, and I'm definitely looking forward to that. Yeah, I'm just gonna jump right in. First, I want to reflect maybe on the year that is 2020, the COVID year. It was a pretty horrible year for many people, but it also has exposed many weaknesses in our society. Among others, the racial and ethnic disparities in European societies, and also our dependency on digital technologies and data. When we talk about Roma people in particularly, yes, and 2021, definitely. When we talk about Roma people in particular, we need to, and Roma people are up to date, still the largest and most discriminated against minority in Europe. We also need to recognize that we're not only socioeconomically excluded, but also digitally. We are largely disconnected from the internet. We lack in digital literacy compared to the benchmark non-Roma population. And that is especially problematic, as I mentioned, during circumstances like a pandemic, where so many people are depending on this technology for just basic life, vital services such as education, employment, but also accessing information about, for example, vaccinating and in general healthcare services. Literally everything we do now, or at least I can talk from my point of view, everything I do is depending on my access to technology and information and data. And as usual, the EU is not really paying attention to marginalized groups who are being left behind in this. And this is not only access to technology. I also want to focus on data, which will segue into algorithmic bias. When we talk about data, Roma are also facing a data gap in many EU member states, especially in Western Europe, because countries are still hesitant to systematically collect data about the living experiences of Roma across Europe, which makes it very hard for policymakers to challenge discriminatory practices or to come up with programs and fund programs and policies that positively impact Roma communities. Without the data, it's very hard to do that. So in this wannabe colorblind society that is Europe today, we have this data gap that is challenging our work in the Roma movement, let's say. But I can also imagine that's the case for any ethnic minority in Europe. So why am I talking about this data gap? Data is basically the lifeblood of policymaking. But also a core ingredient in data-driven technologies such as AI, or to better express it, algorithmic or automated decision-making, because AI is a bit of a broader term that maybe isn't as accurate for the things that we will talk about today. So automated decision-making is very dependent on data. All the machine learning algorithms that are used in automatic decision-making or ADM are based on input data, and the better quality and the quantity of this input data, the more accurate an algorithm can make predictions about something, the more accurate the decision basically can be. If there is a lack of data, such as the lack of data about Roma people and other ethnicities, then we will have basically inaccurate algorithms. And what is worse, when there is data, but that data has embedded biases, then we will have biased results, biased decisions. And how does this biased data impact the data-driven technologies for decision-making and our everyday life experience? I will talk a little bit more. I have prepared a little slide that I found in a really cool article. I'm just gonna share it really quickly so that it's visible. Zoom. Yes. So everyone can see this. Cool. This diagram is basically a simplified framework that visualizes how machine learning algorithms are built from end to end. So from the basic collection of population data to the real world decision at the very end, with real life implications, you can see how in the red letters, there are so many points along the process where humans can introduce and embed biases in these models. Since we all have embedded biases as humans against certain groups of people, for example, Roma people, Black people, women, elderly, the poor, these things will naturally also bleed into the machine learning algorithms. And as you can see, it also has real life implications. So the effect of this, as you can imagine, can sometimes also be quite discriminatory. According to a lot of research that has been done in the digital rights field, most algorithms dealing with decisions about humans that are already deployed are indeed discriminatory, specifically against women, ethnic minorities, and poor people, so the lower socioeconomic groups. People are basically teaching machines to reproduce their subconscious and sometimes even conscious biases. So yeah, I'm going to give maybe 4 broad examples how this is happening. So the 4 examples that I want to talk about really briefly are biometric mass surveillance and image recognition. The second one is predictive policing and predictive sentencing. The third one is on social scoring systems, or basically any automatic decision making in public services. And the last one is algorithms in digital media. So regarding the first one, studies have shown that facial recognition technology is already disproportionately misidentifying women and people with darker skin. This means that the police is more likely going to stop, wrongfully stop, and question, maybe even arrest people from these groups. And this system, for example, is already being deployed and used in countries like the UK. If you're familiar with the Notting Hill Carnival, the police is using similar technologies to identify persons of interest in this particular crowd, which can be quite problematic. In Germany, also during a G20 summit, the police retrospectively searched footage from the protesters, because there were protests, to identify protesters. So it's a scary thought to imagine. For example, I'm speaking as a Roma activist. Imagine Roma people who will go on parades or protests, or Roma people who are crossing a border, and the police uses this opportunity without even asking the people if they're okay with it, to scan their faces and wrongfully stop them and arrest them. So that's the biometric mass surveillance. And then image recognition technology that is not necessarily biometric is also used. For example, in Western Europe, countries like Netherlands, Denmark, and the UK, again, are using something called automatic number plate recognition, ANPR. That's where the police uses automated systems to geolocate motorhomes and caravans, for example, belonging mainly to Eastern Europeans, Roma, and travelers. So that's another example how technology is used to target specific groups based on ethnicity. And again, as was mentioned before, usually marginalized communities are at the forefront of this. The second area, let's say, is predictive policing systems, which are likely to present Roma and other marginalized groups or neighborhoods as risky, because these algorithms have basically been developed based on data that reflects ethnic profiling and racist policing from before. So historical profiling by the police is basically bleeding into this algorithm, and as a result, the system creates a feedback loop where these areas become over-policed hotspots and then creates more crime, which kind of feeds back into the system, and so on and so on. So you can imagine it's not necessarily something that that ends crime in specific areas. Many EU countries are already using a variety of forms of this kind of technology with little regard to assess the accuracy or the impact it has on this community. Algorithms are also used to detect the risk of a person. This is in predictive sentencing in the justice system. So through analyzing a series of decisions against a database of a criminal, this algorithm would be able to predict if a person is at a low risk or at a high risk of committing the crime again. And this is used to determine, for example, the duration of a prison sentence or parole. Studies of such systems in the UK and in the US have shown that it overpredicts criminal behavior among ethnic minorities and among people from lower socioeconomic groups. And then the third one is about social scoring. That's particularly interesting to me because I did sort of encounter this. So basically, what's a social scoring system? It is a system that kind of, if it's not deployed, if it's based on inaccurate or biased data, it could restrict access to vital services like healthcare, social security, credit loans, education, employment, and housing to specific groups of people. And yes, many European countries are already using this massively. For example, as I moved to Germany recently, in order to get a flat, you have to present your Schufa, which is basically a credit score calculated somehow. It's a social score basically ranging from 0 to 100. And it basically shows the landlord or the housing agency how trustworthy you are. What's the problem here is that the algorithm is not entirely transparent. I have no idea how the score is exactly calculated, whether it's based on certain elements that are biased, or what I can do to improve it necessarily, or what I do that damages it. So another example in the field of employment with social scoring is the famous Amazon example. Amazon developed an AI, under quotation, AI, that screens resumes of potential employers. And guess what? It was sexist because it relied on historically biased data. Amazon, like any other big tech company, is a firm that is men dominated, and because their resumes, like male resumes, were used to define the perfect candidate, the algorithm basically rejected most female candidates regardless of talent. So this is another example very visibly showing how it can go wrong when we put algorithms in charge of literally every vital function. But it is being used in the name of efficiency, unfortunately. And the last one is a bit, it's been something that has been talked about a lot. There was this famous documentary, Social Dilemma, for example. It's about technology that is being used to make inferences and predictions about our private attitudes, behaviors, thoughts even, in order to maybe manipulate or nudge us. Manipulate our opinion about certain things, manipulate our behaviors. And This is, for example, visible on social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter, but also search engines like Google, where people basically, like nowadays, people get all their information and shape their worldview based on these platforms. Algorithms are basically behind those, a big part that makes those platforms work. And whoever controls these algorithms kind of has a particular control over what we think. They also have the responsibility, they carry the responsibility in proliferation of disinformation, fake news, harmful content, and so on. Social media has the potential to shift elections, change public attitudes about certain people, like about Roma people and other ethnic minorities. It also has the ability to shift our public opinion about issues, for example, climate change. So yeah, these are the 4 areas I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and switch back to my face. So yeah, these are the 4 areas that I, through my work, found problematic. And contrary to popular belief, these issues of biased algorithms are not really like a futuristic sci-fi problem. It is very real, as you saw. It is happening already. We are all in some way affected, but mostly marginalized communities. And I like to always draw this parallel between this issue and climate change crisis. The whole climate change thing was discovered and theorized a century ago, and people could not believe it then. And to be honest, still today, many people don't believe in it. And of course, now we have 100 years later, we have the UN Climate Agreement, Green Deal, Greta Thunberg, the Extinction Rebellion, and so on. But people should have listened to the warnings and prepared for this sooner to maybe prevent some of the damage and maybe even reverse it. So this is the same kind of thing that I see with the emergence of AI and algorithms and so on. We are at the dawn of this paradigmatic shift of this digital revolution. We have biometric, mass surveillance, AI, and so on. And all this comes with a new host of problems that we are totally not prepared to deal with. And now should be the time to build these safeguards, to protect ourselves, to protect the marginalized communities from these potential damages, and contribute in shaping the direction in which we would like this to go. Because we have the agency to determine whether we want algorithms to have so much control over our lives or not. So yeah, what we can do. So I necessarily don't have the answers, but broadly speaking, I would recommend that we empower decision makers and public services to adapt to these new technologies. So this is like a public policy recommendation where we should all get a better understanding of this, and also shift away our thinking that we need to be always centered on efficiency, but also maybe pay attention on ethics. So technology should be more human-centric rather than efficiency-centric. And then the second one is maybe invest in safeguards and regulatory bodies that oversee these data-driven technologies, bodies that basically oversee algorithms and make sure that there's more transparency. The third one would be to strengthen the involvement of a wider range of civil societies, because yes, there's many digital rights NGOs, for example, but there is also human rights NGOs that traditionally don't necessarily deal with digital rights, but the people they represent are definitely going to be affected. They need to be included in this conversation, but also a wider range of stakeholders in general. So The last two would be more, the last two recommendations are more on the awareness raising. So to make this issue more important, we need to increase its salience. So we can't have a salient issue if people don't know about it. So this is basically a lacking component as well. I've seen many cool initiatives lately, like the Reclaim Your Face in Europe. That's a European citizens initiative, which I recommend everyone should support. But yeah, we need more of that. And then lastly, we need to empower European citizens to adapt to these changes in the digital revolution. And among those citizens should be definitely marginalized people who will most likely be negatively impacted. So Roma people, for example, where are the Roma people in this conversation? So yeah, how can we actually do all of these things, and what is the role of philanthropy? That is basically what I am very excited to talk more, but in a discussion. This was it for me. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk.